Hello, everyone. Thank you, and a warm welcome to all of you for joining us today, celebrating the World Day of Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development. My name is Jeanette Stewart, and I'm the founder of Translation Commons. Translation Commons is a nonprofit community of language professionals and technology experts. Our mission is to equalize the digital divide by enabling digital opportunities for minority and indigenous languages. We strive for digital inclusion so no language and no linguist is left behind. Our teams of volunteers create free resources, tools, and online events such as the one today. We are excited to host today's celebration of the World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development in partnership with UNESCO Secretariat of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. The overall arching theme today is Indigenous Languages and Technology, Opportunities for Accessibility and Diversity. We are honored to have the participation of experts from various fields who will share their knowledge and experience. We are fortunate to have a wonderful volunteer staff that is producing the event. And we are grateful to each and every one of you for your time, energy, and thoughtful participation. Today's opening celebration is Mr. Jaco Dutoit, Chief of Section for Universal Access to Information, Communication, and Information Sector at UNESCO in France.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, and a very warm welcome to everybody that is joining us today from across your screens. As Jeanette mentioned, my name is Jaco Dutoit, and from the Communication Information Sector, and I'll be making opening remarks on behalf of UNESCO. Your presence today is already a source of optimism, as it demonstrates a collective commitment, not only of the volunteers, but also of the speakers, so that we could see at a global level the preservation of the world's indigenous languages. As we gather today for this World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development, we delve into discussions about indigenous languages and technology that resonate deeply with the broader goal of maintaining cultural diversity, the International Day. This day was officially adopted in 2002 by the UN General Assembly, and it celebrates the richness of the world's cultures and underscores the importance of an intercultural dialogue for peace and sustainable development. Languages are part of that very rich cultural diversity, and it's an essential part of our culture as it carries our identity and our history. As they've done for millions of years, our languages ensures that traditions, stories, and knowledge are passed down through generations. For indigenous communities, some that are represented here, languages are not just means of communication, but repositories of their identity, customs, and wisdom. Within indigenous societies, women in particular often play an important role in maintaining cultural practices and transmitting the languages, its expressions and practices. This is why we need to make sure that we continue to empower indigenous women and their language and the role that they play. We have seen a constant decline of languages throughout the century, and it is imperative that the global community explore methods to combat this disappearance. In recognition of this decline of diversity of languages, the United Nations Assembly proclaimed the period between 2022 and 2032 as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. The decade aims to mobilize global efforts to preserve, revitalize, and promote linguistic diversity. Now, today we live also in a digital age, and digital empowerment is a crucial element to ensure the practical use of indigenous languages. Despite the widespread use of language technologies, support for the over 7,500 spoken languages worldwide is severely lacking too. This digital gap puts native speakers at a disadvantage, further putting their language in danger of digital extinction. Fortunately, there is a concerned global effort among experts to develop innovative solutions for integrating Indigenous languages into the digital sphere, enabling translation and interpretation. And we are lucky to have here among us several of those that are pioneering some of those technologies. UNESCO is thrilled to continue to work with partners such as Translation Commons that was presented by Jeanette. Integrating Indigenous languages into digital platforms presents opportunities for wider cultural diversity online. It is our hope that today's event can facilitate knowledge sharing and discourse regarding the intersections between digital empowerment, language preservation, and cultural diversity through an inclusive and empathetic lens. I thank everybody that are present here, and we look forward to fruitful discussions among all of us. Let me conclude by a quote from the 19th century Native American Sioux chef, Sitting Bull. Only after the last tree has been cut down, only after the last river has been poisoned, only after the last fish has been caught, only then will you find that money cannot be eaten. Just as nature holds intrinsic worth beyond material wealth, Indigenous languages embody the rich cultural heritage and wisdom of communities worldwide. Thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you all the best in today's deliberations.
Thank you very much, Jaco. And thank you for the profound quote as well. It's a great way with your opening remarks to start the celebration. Our first session is moderated by Dr. Rambatla Siva Prasad, former honorary professor of CDLTR and professor of anthropology at the University of Hyderabad in India. Siva?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever we are all located. And in this session, it's a very interesting session. We are going to discuss, we have three important speakers to discuss on inclusivity and diversity for Indigenous communities. I just would like to focus on a few things when we talk about inclusivity and diversity for Indigenous communities. In fact, I would always say it's an ideological kind of a differentiation, because Indigenous communities are basically communitarian, and they always emphasize on inclusivity because they are multicultural and multilingual, or even with all the diversities, they still are inclusive, because for inclusivity for them is also something to do with the nature as a part of this. They also consider themselves as a part of the wider nature, not the only creation of nature. Or in other words, there is a basic understanding of inclusivity in Indigenous kind of ideals. And also in terms of their concept of diversity, they respect diversity. But given this, now we find the with the kind of things that are happening with the globalization and the dominant languages trying to dominate over the languages, and with the development of technology, how is it that we can ensure the inclusivity of these communities, which are actually the ones who preserve the earth, preserve the entire nature, and which is our greed, which we have trying to take over their resources and all that, and marginalize them. So that is in that kind of a context, in the kind of power relations, how do we talk about inclusivity in the in application of technology, in the preservation of knowledges, in the preservation of cultures, in the preservation of languages and all that we have. And I just would like to briefly mention these ideas, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate the kind of inputs that we're going to have. I would like to take the first opportunity to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Vicky Cousins. She is a Kerry Hurong. I may be pardoned if my spelling is little not proper. Gundismara Citizen and Research Fellow at RMIT University, Australia. And Vicky is a community language practitioner and has been working with Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages in the RMIT University for more than 45 years. She has been an actionist. She's an advocate, language advocate, and she has been working for the revitalization of languages and practices of the communities, especially for capacity strengthening and legacy. And the floor is yours, Dr. Vicky. Please, 10 minutes is the time. Thank you.
Pardon me. Thank you for that kind introduction, and hello to everybody online and my co-presenters. I'm going to talk about my research project I'm currently undertaking with my own language communities. And I was just reflecting on some of the comments so far about the urgency and what's going on in the global context, as well as in Australia, where we have the fastest rate of loss in the world of our languages, which for me, it's so urgent. It's like a national emergency, in a global pandemic, as I describe it. Never mind COVID, I think there's a pandemic in our language loss, and it's so important to the future of the planet and all of our survival. And the other thing, interestingly, whilst we're talking about technology, and that's kind of one of the key things, and my project involves technology in the documenting and keeping of the work that we do, one of the premises that I'm trying to support is the oral transmission of knowledge, which is something that is majorly threatened, and a traditional practice and a way of learning and teaching, as it is with many cultures around the world. So there's not a lot of technology in what I'll be talking about, but definitely some. Our State Language Centre, VACL, has an archival digital library that we'll be utilising in the project. So I've just, on the first screen, revival languages are emergent and ever transforming. They can be simultaneously researched, learned, and developed in a single overarching and ongoing process. And that's a quote from ourselves, myself and two of my colleagues, in the work that we're doing, looking at what are revival languages in terms of, particularly in relation to linguistics and how that works. And there is kind of not a really a place in linguistics for revival languages, and that's been shifting in more recent times. But just a quick context in the background, many of you probably already know, but we had 100% of language speakers, multilingual people at 1800, and now 1996, and now we're down to 13% or less. And it is predicted by some of the academics that by 2050, there'll be no surviving fluently spoken languages in Australia. So that just terrifies me and gives me great anxiety. And I've changed from the word activist to actionist, because I think we've got to take action. There has to be action now. All the talking's been done. And I'm fortunate to be on a National Language Policy Committee where I get to be able to voice those things to the federal government, where we really need some change to happen. And that last stat there about the survey, you know, it's that continuing decline. And we're due a new survey very soon. A quick look at Victoria, the state of Victoria in Australia, in southern Australia. And down on the left, if you can read that, it says Kirawurrung. That's my language group down there to the left of the screen and west from Melbourne. We are a community of language revitalisation. We have no fluent speakers. So we're working from some memory and language in the community and archival records. We've been doing this work since the early 1990s, all unpaid work primarily. Mother tongue language revitalisation through applied and creative cultural immersion practice is my ARC funded DECRA project, and it's examining the topic of our Kirawurrung and related dialects, language acquisition and learning, and the everyday lived settings, and across the spectrum of our cultural revitalisation praxis. The aims are to examine and test applied immersive Kirawurrung cultural methodological approaches, including ways of knowing, being and doing. The primary objective is to research Kirawurrung language learning and acquisition practice in everyday lived settings and through creative cultural practice. We have lots of words, but I'm over words. When will we be able to speak our mother tongue? So this project is really targeting family clan groups and learning to use language every day in everyday activities and in your life. So I will document the cultural methodology and process for engaging in language learning as a cultural revitalisation practice. So I'm trying to attempt immersion, which is very challenging when you're going from words to actually speaking. And some of this will be done through creative practice activities that we do when we come together in family clan groups, and we'll have camps because not everybody lives in the same geographical in our home country. So we'll be doing some of that. And I'm hoping that this will significantly extend and impact national and global research in the field of language and cultural revitalisation, and generations through this intercultural, intergenerational knowledge transmission in support of our Kirawurrung and related dialects language futurity. I want to develop and produce language immersion practices and resources for use in those everyday settings, build speech communities and develop an ecology to grow our language again, and through incremental targeted learning actions in those little micro language ecology spaces of family clan groups. So in the home with the children, because it's not happening. What we have is some learning of songs or speeches or public, using language for public ceremonies, but not in the home and every day. And therefore, enabling a longer-term macro growth in the language ecology through those interactions with the newly developed family group speakers as a speech community, and documentation and analysis of all of that with digital technology as well as probably hard copies, and produce and publish resources for communities and some public sharing. It's really for us. So I have a Nothing About Us Without Us project methodology. It's participatory, it's collaborative, it's Aboriginal designed and led. It's engaging with communities of knowledge holders and applying various context-specific approaches or methodologies, including those ones that are listed Some people may be aware of some of those. Some of them are particularly related to First Nations methodologies in Australia. Standpoint, deep listening, ways of knowing, yarning and story work very much relate to our ways of being and doing. So a couple of examples. So I work with a linguist, Travis Ira, Dr. Travis Ira, who supports my work. We've collaborated for, I don't know, about 18 years now. And moving on from words to some of these everyday conversations, and working with, what I'll be doing is working with the family clan groups in translating what is the way, because while we speak English with an Aboriginal language base, so we speak it slightly differently than mainstream Australian English. And so some of those language patterns and ways of saying things are still embedded in how we speak, and developing culturally appropriate and true to the language and culture of how we speak in language. So I'm doing some of that development, which linguistics is a key tool in with the cultural interpretation and translation, something that we really need to be able to do, or have, sorry, to do this work. A few more very simple things, but it looks very simple, but this is a step forward for us in our journey. And I am getting quite anxious and frantic about it, as my dad developed our community language dictionary in 1996, and we still don't have fluent speakers. So what are we doing? So time for action. Like, we've been doing lots of things, but as there are no paid language positions for people to sit down and, like, I'm fortunate with the position I have, that I'm able to now been working on our grammar so that we can do this. That's what I've been doing for the last few years. Otherwise, we don't have a paid language worker or any, a team. Oh, yes. So that was some of the other ideas that I'm doing, is around activities, starting with activities, getting people to go home and practice those activities and speaking, and then we'll do another one and we'll start joining them up together and come together at a camp to practice in a larger group from just your family in home. So, it's about turning the tide. It's not just stopping the loss, although we've done some work on that, but stopping the loss, we have to turn the tide, because we're actually not stopping the loss. The loss is continuing. And to turn the tide, we need that resourcing and support to bring language home, to be living in communities and families. So it's kind of back to the start in that statistic there, where the prediction is by 2050, we won't be speaking, nobody who, even where there are fluent speakers, that there will be nobody speaking fluent languages by 2050. So that's kind of where things are at. And thank you. I've just got a few more slides. That's really it. The crux of what I'm doing, and some of these next slides are just talking about quotes and what language is to us. Language is country, it's ceremony, it's dance, song, painting up, health and well-being, and language is family. So thank you.
Thank you. It was very interesting, and because as an anthropologist, I really appreciate the way in which you approached the language of Aborigines, emphasizing more on their methodological or epistemological methodological practices, which is very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the next presentation is going to be by Ms. Aina Twig. is a youth activist from CC UNESCO, Tunaksa, and Blackfoot Nations. Ayana is an Indigenous youth activist who focuses on Indigenous rights, issues, and language revitalization. She's a researcher, a linguist with her community, and a member of the Youth Advisory Group of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and is a part of the International Decade for Indigenous Language Working Group led by CC UNESCO. Floor is yours, Ms. Ayana.
Isukivke Pineskich, Husokin, Okriga Sawasaka, Nasan Mietki, Ugaklik Ayana Twig, who any Tunachat, Wanmugantik, Hugakigahi, Aginkum Shasnukliet. Hello, everyone. My name is Ayana Twig. I come from two different Indigenous communities in Canada. I am Tunacha on my mother's side and Blackfoot on my father's side. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of British Columbia with a double major in First Nations, Endangered Languages, and Linguistic Anthropology. I am starting my Master's of Education in Indigenous Language Revitalization at the University of Victoria this July. One way that I'm advocating for Indigenous language revitalization is through social media. I think that technology and media are an important component for the Indigenous languages today and into the future, and youth have an important role to play in that with the knowledge and skills that they hold if we encourage them. It also creates a relationship between youth and fluent speakers to work together. I believe that social media is a great tool to advocate for language revitalization because it creates accessibility for people to learn. That is why I created my Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok accounts called @TunachaPride, because I wanted to connect with youth in my own community to encourage them to learn our language, which only has 20 fluent speakers left. It's very critical that we encourage language revitalization in my community because as time progresses, our fluent speakers are passing as well, and so too is our knowledge. I thought that by using social media, it would connect with them in a way that they would feel comfortable and create a safe space for youth and others in my community to start learning, because for many, this can be an intimidating first step. The type of content I create includes sharing and teaching our language through fun videos, such as sharing our place names, greetings, common phrases, and stories. I'm a language learner myself, and I wanted to show people that it does not matter if you make mistakes while learning, but that it is actually necessary for learning. I would say that my social media accounts have been successful in advocating and promoting language revitalization because it has encouraged many people in my community and Indigenous people around the world to start learning their languages because they feel inspired, connected, and safe to do so. My page has also become a place for non-Indigenous people to learn how they can become an ally and support Indigenous communities with language revitalization. Beyond social media, I use other technology tools and softwares to support language revitalization in my community. For instance, I adapted one of our oral legend stories into an animation. I thought of this project on my own and enrolled the help of 2 classmates to help me. I did not have any funding for this project, and none of us had any animation skills prior to this project. I taught myself how to use the Adobe Character Animator software by watching YouTube videos until 3 a.m. several nights. The reason I am sharing this is because there are many ways that we can utilize digital tools and technologies to support language revitalization. However, they are not always accessible to Indigenous communities or inclusive of Indigenous languages. There are many challenges and barriers I have faced using these tools. I share the challenges and struggles I have encountered using digital tools and technologies as a youth person to signify the disparity of access that we have to digital tools and technologies. By sharing this, I hope that it can identify gaps that exist within technologies and the inclusivity of Indigenous languages, and hopefully create opportunities to address these gaps. Alongside sharing my own perspectives, I also partnered with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and Norway to gather inputs from youth around the world via social media. We developed and launched this campaign for a side event that UNESCO, CC-UNESCO, and Norway held at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in New York this past April. I wanted to share this campaign in this presentation because it relates to the theme of this event. We asked youth these two questions. How can digital tools and technologies be better tailored to support the maintenance and promotion of Indigenous languages? And in what ways can digital platforms be used to foster a sense of community and connection among Indigenous youth? First, I will discuss challenges I have encountered in my own personal suggestions. First, in the digital world, many Indigenous communities are reclaiming their languages via digital tools. One way that we are keeping our languages active is through social media and texting. However, keyboard compatibility proves to be one barrier for Indigenous languages represented online. Many Indigenous languages do not have a keyboard developed and therefore lack online representation, and the ones that have been created face issues with Apple and Android devices, such as glitches, slow to respond, and more. Another concern with keyboard compatibility is predictive text. As we type on our Indigenous keyboards, there should be a function to support predictive text, just like English keyboards for Indigenous keyboards. Second, AI can and should be utilized to support Indigenous languages on our mobile devices, such as speech recognition and speech to text. Creating inclusive technological advancement for Indigenous languages should also encompass already existing tools, such as Siri, microphones on keyboards, and auto-generated captions on social media. AI already has the capacity to do this, but in order to make this a reality, tech companies have to be willing to work with Indigenous communities and ensure that terms and conditions relating to ownership, usage, and accessibility are dictated by and align with the values of the community and language. 3, tailoring digital tools and technologies to support the maintenance and promotion of Indigenous languages is not only a matter of technological innovation, but also a deeply cultural and community-driven endeavor. Currently, accessibility to technological tools is wildly underrepresented in Indigenous communities. This includes access to training and knowledge on how to use these tools, and funding to actually develop digital tools. Simple solutions can include partnerships with tech companies, scholarships for youth, and capacity building between companies and communities. 4, this can also be addressed by developing templates and/or open source language apps, softwares, and tools for communities. By having open source templates, it creates the possibility for Indigenous communities to create online content without starting from scratch. And lastly, secured privacy to keep our languages safe online. Even on Apple, the iOS apps do not ensure the privacy for our languages due to Apple's policies. Now, let's look at the results from the social media campaign. Indigenous youth stated, Indigenous language translation needs to be supported on social media. More phone apps, books, and online content should be created in Indigenous languages so people can access and learn their languages and be implemented into formal education. Collaboration with Indigenous organizations, governments, funding agencies is crucial for securing resources and ensuring that digital initiatives align with the needs and priorities of Indigenous communities. However, successful implementation requires more than just technological solutions. It necessitates a deep understanding of cultural nuances, community involvement, and ongoing support to ensure that sustainability and effectiveness of these initiatives in safeguarding Indigenous languages for generations to come. Advances in artificial intelligence can be leveraged to build engaging digital interfaces to promote Indigenous languages and cultures, such as the AI Cultural Curator for the Sioux people in central Taiwan. Lastly, by having Indigenous languages represented on social media, it creates accessibility and a safe space for youth to be connected to their community and language while living far away. To conclude this presentation, the collaboration between Indigenous communities, Indigenous youth, and tech companies are integral in bridging the disparity in access to tech tools and digital representation for our languages. However, with this unified approach, tech companies working closely with Indigenous communities need to identify the needs and gaps, as well as enable communities to decide for themselves parameters of data ownership, usage, and accessibility. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I would like to thank Indigenous Languages and Translation Commons for inviting me to be a speaker.
Thank you, Aina. You kept your time, absolutely. And it's a very interesting approach you have adopted, using technology, how technology can be utilized in revitalizing, and because you have the advantage of being the speaker of the languages. So as an insider, you have the advantage of understanding the dynamics of the problems and try to use the technology. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Now, the last of the speakers in this session is my one of my old friends, Professor Ramesh Gaur. Is actually is a professor and head of Department of Kalanidhi Division of the Indian in the Indira Gandhi. It's called INGCA, Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, in Delhi, in India, and he has many credentials to his as a feather in the cap. He was a Fulbright scholar. Of course, he was awarded. He received a number of awards. He's basically more into library and information sciences, and he was a nominated member of National Advisory Committee of UNESCO, actually IAC, and member of the World Program, MOW program, and also member of UNESCO Global Task Force on Indigenous languages. And he has also been actively engaged in many committees of the Government of India that included Niti Aayog, UGC, and other boards. I don't want to, this is a long list. I wanted to cut it short. In fact, next 10 minutes is Professor Gaur's. Floor is yours, Professor Gaur.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I wish you all World Day for Culture, Diversity, for Dialogue and Development. In this event, I'm going to speak on preserving linguistic diversity for preserving cultural diversity, protecting, promoting handwritten knowledge. I'm Professor Ramesh Chandra Gaur, currently Dean and in charge of UNESCO Memory of the World program at Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, Ministry of Culture. I'm also representing India as a member state in UNESCO Global Task Force on International Decade on Indigenous Languages. Thanks for opportunity to speak on this very, very important day and very important topic. The topic which I have chosen basically because India possesses over 10 million handwritten ancient manuscripts. And IGNC, Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, one of the premier institutions, is working on preservation, promotion, conservation, and creation of repository of manuscripts, which basically represent communities' lived experiences, customs, and perspectives, and it encourages cross-cultural exploration and appreciation for the shared humanity that underpins various cultural expressions. In this presentation, my focus would be like why handwritten knowledge is important in terms of preserving both linguistic diversity and cultural diversity. I strongly believe language and culture are inextricably linked, with linguistic diversity as a crucial component of cultural diversity. Handwritten knowledge repositories such as manuscripts, codices, and inscriptions constitute invaluable linguistic and cultural heritage that must be safeguarded. These handwritten artifacts embody diverse and varied ways of human expression, encapsulating various civilizations, unique worldviews, belief systems, and intellectual traditions. Linguistic diversity refers to the multitude of languages spoken around the world. So basically, when we have to talk about preserving cultural diversity and linguistic diversity, both go hand in hand together. For preserving linguistic diversity, what are the important? Like cultural heritage preservation, because languages carry unique cultural knowledge, tradition, and histories. And when language disappears, so does a significant part of the culture. Each language embodies distinct ways of thinking, perceiving the world, and expressing ideas, contributing to the diversity of human experiences. Maintaining identity. Languages are central to individual and community identity. Losing a language can lead to a loss of identity. And preservation of wisdom and knowledge through languages. It contains valuable ecological, medicinal, and spiritual knowledge passed through the generation to generations. And many languages have unique terms and concepts that encapsulate wisdom about nature, relationship, and societal organization. Languages also promote intercultural understanding between the communities, between the regions, between the two countries, between the entire globe. And also, it fosters understanding and respect for different ways of life, promoting tolerance and empathy among communities. Multilingualism encourages dialogue, exchange, and collaboration between diverse cultures, enriching global discourse and problem solving. It has a lot of socio-economic benefits because preserving linguistic diversity can have tangible economic benefits, including promoting tourism, attracting cultural industries like creative economy, and facilitating different type of international trade and diplomacy. Indigenous when supported can contribute to the sustainable development. And of course, it help in protecting human rights and providing equality and equal opportunities. When we talk about handwritten knowledge, it basically encapsulate the assortment of human culture, wisdom, and worldviews across history. Preserving these handwritten repositories safeguard the authenticity of linguistic and cultural expression, because many times you need evidences of your past, and these evidences are available in handwritten ancient manuscripts. It offers an invaluable insight into the historical, social, and philosophical foundation of civilization, enabling the study of linguistic evolution and cross-cultural exchange. It also exhibits integrated calligraphic styles and artistic embellishments, reflecting the aesthetic values and artistic appreciation of the time. Engage in intercultural dialogue, understanding, and in modern era, globalization prioritizing the preservation of handwritten knowledge, uphold linguistic diversity and cultural heritage against homogenization. When we talk about preserving handwritten knowledge, why it is important? Because it is a unique cultural artifact. which encapsulate diverse societies. Cultural heritage reflect their beliefs, customs, and intellectual pursuit. Each manuscript is a tangible link to the past, providing insights into historical events, societal norms, and artistic expression of bygone eras. And preservation of linguistic diversity is important in the context of handwritten repository, because knowledge contained in these manuscripts, it is a treasure, and by preserving it, we are preserving linguistic diversity. It helps in transmission of traditional knowledge, intergenerational transfer. It contains traditional knowledge, including folklore, oral tradition, and indigenous wisdom passed through generation to generation. These texts offers valuable insight into ancient practices, ecological knowledge, medicinal remedies, and spiritual beliefs, contributing to our understanding of human history and culture. And of course, no historical research can be done without these ancient manuscripts, because it links our present to the past and also to the future. And more importantly, these manuscripts were handwritten and represent various kind of artistic calligraphy, and this ancient form of calligraphy can also be preserved through handwritten manuscripts. It also helps in preservation of our cultural identity, and it safeguards the society's connection with their cultural root and ensure continuity of their heritage for the future generation. Definitely through these manuscripts, by organizing exhibitions and digitizing it, creating digital repositories, we can definitely provide our posterity. Like these are in the media which bound to be perished, but we can definitely safeguard these repositories. Let's coming to India, Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, which is the largest institution working for preservation of manuscript heritage. As per our estimate, there are more than 10 million manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts available in India. Numbers may be very large, but due to various invasions, a lot of manuscripts have been destroyed, manuscripts have been stolen and taken away. So still, if we talk about manuscript, we have large heritage, and we are very well aware of it. We started preservation of handwritten manuscript in 1989. So far, we have microfilmed 300,000 manuscripts from 52 manuscript libraries in India. That's the statistics given here. Later in 2003, it was realized that this work is so huge. So a national mission for manuscript was launched, and this mission is extensively devoted to the work of documentation, cataloging, digitization of manuscripts. So far, we have cataloged 4.5 million manuscripts. We have conjured more than 81 billion folios of manuscript. We have digitized over 300,000 manuscripts. We have published 85 books and organized a lot of training workshops, because training workshops are very important. We also have a PG diploma course in manuscriptology. So we have been trying to preserve both handwritten manuscript across India through our partner centers and repositories, and also through that we are preserving the languages, because these manuscripts, which are in paper form or in form of various other like palm leaf manuscripts, birchbark manuscripts, bamboo leaf manuscripts, and scrolls. It is in various formats, and these need proper take care and take conservation. In terms of linguist, the important part of these manuscripts is that these manuscript contains a lot of ancient scripts. As an estimate, we may consider about 64 scripts. Some of them important, like Brahmi, Kharosthi, Sharda, Granth, Nevari or Anjana, Nandinagari, Modi, Takri, Mithleshwar, or Trihatwa. Like Brahmi, which is considered 4th century to BC to 4th century CE. It is one of the oldest ancient script in India, and a lot of literature, particularly inscriptions, old inscriptions are available in Brahmi. Recently, I was in Mongolia and I saw the old Mongol language was also in the Brahmi. So it's not just in India. The Brahmi's presence is across Asia. Kharoshthi, which is also considered third VC to fourth VC. It is also called Karosati, and you can see the figure script of that Granth, which is basically found in South India, 6th to 12th century. A lot of manuscripts are available in Granth. Sharada, which is generated in Kashmir in 8th century to 14th century, and a lot of valuable literature like Avinav Gupta and Anand Vardhan. A lot of people have worked on this important script. Nivari, which is part of Nepal and Bihar and Sikkim, 8th to 11th century. Nandinagari, which is part found in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, part of India, 8th to 19th century. Modi, which is basically 12th to 16th century. It is a lot found in Maharashtra and Karnataka borders. Takri, Western Himalayas, 16th to 19th century. So basically, all these scripts are being preserved through preservation of handwritten manuscripts. We are also having a lot of training programs being organized on manuscriptology and calligraphy. So at IGNCA, we are preserving both handwritten manuscript as well as the whole linguistic diversity in this ancient script through workshops, through PG diploma course, and various ways of translation of these into a modern language. There are a lot of examples of community participation, but time is limited for me. Across India, you will find a lot of examples where community, like manuscript repositories are found in temples and mutts across India. And as I mentioned, we are organizing a lot of capacity building program, both in preservation of linguistic diversity of these scripts and also the preservation of the diversity of cultural diversity to preserve it for posterity. Another important thing which I want to highlight here is the UNESCO Memory of the World program. This program, which started in 1982, is helping in preserving the ancient heritage all over the world through international register, regional register, and national register. In international register, we already have 11 nominations, and just now in the regional register, we have nominated 3 manuscripts recently, which have been inscribed in MOBCAB meeting held at. So this program is one which is internationally helping in preservation of handwritten knowledge. Particularly, it is open to all kind of knowledge, but handwritten knowledge is a lot being inscribed in this particular program. Let me conclude by saying that if we have to preserve our linguistic diversity or cultural diversity, both need to be preserved. Without preserving linguistic diversity, you cannot preserve cultural diversity. And India, a country like India, which is possessing more than 10 million manuscripts in different scripts, it's a big challenge. We have over more than 1,654 mother tongues. Still, as per our census survey of 2011, we have 1,369 mother tongues. And it is a big challenge for us to preserve our linguistic diversity. But I'm sure that with the support of everybody, including UNESCO and the Indian government, we are going to do it. With these words, I just close it here and thank the organizers for giving me opportunity to speak in this event. I'm available online, and we'll be happy to take up questions, or please feel free to email me the questions which are being raised here. With these words, namaskar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very lucid and clear presentation. And another dimension that Professor Gaur has brought in, and that is manuscripts, especially how different systems of knowledge working can be utilized. Now, I think we have 5 minutes for question answer, or 4 minutes because we have short of time now. Any questions and answers? Any questions, please? Yeah, I think yeah, please, Dr. Vicky, please.
Thank you. Thank you both to the other panelists. Such amazing work going on and thinking and contribution. I'm curious for the manuscript project, how you mentioned that the government, there was government support and how that was funded or is funded and continuing. It's a massive, the numbers blow my mind. I'm like, wow, that's so much. Yeah, how is language supported in India generally? Because yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, for Dr. Gao.
Thank you. Yes, you are absolutely right. We have such a huge task to preserve our linguistic diversity as well as cultural diversity. And we have very good government support. There is a particular mission mode project to preserve ancient manuscript and also to train the new generation of scholar in these ancient scripts. So we have short-term workshops and we have also a one-year postgraduate diploma in manuscriptology and paleography. So that way we are producing new generation of scholar and they are learning all these scripts. And more importantly, we are also deciphering these scripts. Like my institute alone has published over 1,000 books in English and Hindi to transfer this knowledge from ancient script to the the new one. And similarly, like now, a lot of attention is given. Our new education policy is focusing education in mother tongue. So, a lot of focus on giving importance to the mother tongues. And I'm also recently I'm in the process of making a film on uh, dialects in decline and giving more attention to the tribal languages and languages which are spoken. So definitely we have a huge responsibility, but at the same time we have very supportive system to take care of all those. Slowly and steadily, we are trying to preserve this knowledge heritage.
Yeah, there is one question to Ayana. There is a general perception that First Nations youth aren't interested in learning their languages. Is this a myth? If so, why and why not? This is a question from Michael.
Hi, thank you so much for your question. I think that it is a myth. And the reason I think it's a myth is because I think a lot of Indigenous youth, they want to learn their languages. However, when they start this journey of learning, they're not properly supported in this learning endeavor. A lot of times what I hear is people, adults, the older generation, they always say youth need to learn our languages, which is true. However, we are always told you need to learn, but we're never told how to learn. We are never supported in this journey. And it's really important that we support our youth in learning their languages to ensure that they will be successful and to ensure that they will want to continue to learn, because it is a very intimidating first step when you're learning your language. It's very hard to figure out, where do I start? Who do I seek out for this information? Where do I find this information? And it becomes a very overwhelming journey for people. And what usually happens for our youth is they try to learn, but they're not supported. They don't know where to go. They don't know where to find these resources. And then they eventually stop learning because it's easier to stop versus to continue going. So I think it's a myth in the sense that our youth want to learn. They just don't know where to start. They're not supported properly. And also, a lot of times, if they don't want to learn, it's because of outside contributors such as school. Our youth are going to school, they're learning in English or other dominant colonial languages. And when they come home, there's really no reason for them to continue learning their languages. There's no fostering of their languages at the home level. So I think that this is why it's a myth, but I think that there's also ways that we can support our youth to continue learning their languages or even support language revitalization. And that's why I say we have to encourage youth in innovative ways that they can be interested, such as using technology and media. Thank you so much for your question.
Yeah. I think one question in the chat box. This is by text to Professor Gaur. It says, in capturing handwritten materials digitally, is information lost about the tools and the manner of writing to originally create the materials? Do we know how to recreate the writing as the authors did?
First of all, recapturing the knowledge basically is still all these scripts. There is the manual translation only because OCRs are not available for any of these script because challenge of their calligraphy things. So still we are trying our best to develop. So most of the translation is manual. Like we generate new generation of scholar who knows these scripts. They read it, and another big challenge is that on one subject there are thousands of manuscripts. So when you are translating it, you have to go through entire collection of, and then you have to write a kind of commentary or summary of those valuable information in these. So number of institutions in different field, because these manuscripts are on alternative medical science, on astronomy, on mathematics, on ancient architecture system, on various kind of cultural traditions and our Vedas and other things. In terms of rewriting, because its number is so huge, so there is a, I've seen one project where some Jain manuscripts, they are rewriting all these manuscripts on current paper media using the same handwritten technology. By manually they are writing that. But in terms of like capturing knowledge, still it's everything is currently manual only. Machine learning or machine tools, definitely we are digitizing in image format, but still trying our best. There is some project going on currently to develop some kind of search system for that.
Thank you, Professor Gaur. And I think we can close it now, Janet.
Yes.
Yeah, let me first thank all the three speakers. In fact, I find it very difficult to summarize, but all the three have spoken on three different dimensions. And methodologically, I find very interesting kind of approaches. Vicky's presentation had taken the cultural dimensions from the people and with their epistemological and research, kind of approaches. And Aina has concentrated more using the technology and social media to revitalize the language. And Professor Gaur has talked about how from the manuscripts one can, preserve, and also for the posterity, how this knowledge can be utilized all the way. Thank you for the wonderful session. Thank you all. Thanks for the opportunity, Janet. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everyone, from the first session. As a matter of fact, the first session is opening the grounds for the next two sessions. We will be diving deeper in some of these topics that have already been mentioned by our experts. In this next session, we will discuss cultural diversity and new media for Indigenous communities. As an important emerging field, enabling Indigenous people to reach other audiences, Indigenous digital media have the greater potential not only to serve the needs and interests of the Indigenous peoples themselves, but also to fulfill a broader mandate in society, contributing to dialogue for peace and stability in the world. Our first speaker is Dr. Tabea DeVille, Associate Professor at the University of Limerick in Ireland, and member of the Keyboards team at Translation Commons.
Hello, my name is Tabea DeVille, and I'm presenting on behalf of the Keyboards team at Translation Commons. The topic of the presentation is keyboard development as an act of inclusivity, opportunities and challenges. The Keyboards initiative at Translation Commons has three main goals. We want to develop keyboards for as many languages as possible. We want to enable others to develop keyboards, and we want to enable others to train keyboard developers. We do this by actually developing keyboards, developing and describing processes for keyboard development, and by training others to make keyboards. In this presentation, I will first discuss what the concept of a digitally marginalized language is, and what the process of language digitization entails. We will then go over keyboard development and how it is an act of inclusivity, and then ask the question and discuss it, what it actually means to be truly inclusive. So what do we mean with the term digital marginalization? As you most likely know, digital technology started out as being very Anglo-centric, which was due to the fact that a lot of this technology actually got initially conceived and developed in English-speaking environments. And then over the decades, a lot more languages were included, which is why we now have many of the world languages being basically as functional as English. However, the languages we are interested in when we talk about digital marginalization are those that are still not at all or insufficiently supported. So that can mean that there is maybe no keyboard available for the language, or the language writing system isn't actually encoded in Unicode yet, or more advanced things are not available, such as predictive text. And then, of course, to what extent is it possible to find information in that language anywhere, and so on and so forth. So when a language is digitally marginalized, this is not necessarily a small language, this is not necessarily a minority language. This happens to also major languages in the world that have millions and millions of speakers. This statement is especially true if we consider digital marginalization to be a continuum. While there are only very few languages that are not supported in Unicode with their script, Urdu, which is spoken by more than 68 million speakers in the world, has a script in Unicode and also keyboards and a lot of supports. There's also a lot of research happening, but still the way it is digitized is still quite problematic. There's a very interesting discussion in the article that I have mentioned on the slide here. But the result of this would be that it is very difficult for speakers of those languages to access information and perspectives. And that can be, that they don't have access to local information or more global and general information. So what we know to be possible with learning things on the internet and finding out would be very limited to digitally marginalized speakers. Then also the ability to share information and perspectives, so they might not be able to share information within the language community. And we also don't have access to their perspectives because they can't share their perspective online, and we have, if they did, we would have no way of actually understanding it because there's no translation available, for example. The ability to communicate with other speakers of the language. So if you think about how much communicating you do on your phone with a messaging app, for example, this is very difficult if a language isn't fully able to be written in, for example, or if there is no predictive text for more advanced systems and so on. And then what we also need to consider is that when people have additional needs, then when a language isn't properly digitized, then accessibility can suffer for them. So this could mean, for example, that a person who needs a screen reader would find it very difficult to read a website with a screen reader if the website doesn't actually have the text typed out there, but has embedded images, because the person creating the website was worried about the text being displayed properly on all different types of browsers and all different configurations. So there is an additional intersectional aspect to digital marginalization when it comes to any sort of additional needs that people might have. This is where language digitization comes in, and where it would be an act of inclusivity. This is a multi-step process, and therefore it involves many different groups and individuals. So this could be, for example, the initial font design for any sort of script or writing system. Then it could be the encoding of the writing system in Unicode, or providing additional locale data in the CLDR. And then as a later step, that would be the keyboard development that we are engaged in. And then there are many other steps afterwards that would be including language data for many different purposes. While we do think of language digitization in general and keyboard development specifically as an act of inclusivity, we also need to be very conscious of the fact that there are better and maybe not so good ways of approaching this from an inclusivity perspective. So for example, there are languages that exist in different countries, and over the years the language varieties have developed in different directions, and that could mean that there are different writing systems or different variations on the writing system in place. So this can be as extreme as having, Arabic script or Latin script for a language, but or even when you have, let's say, Latin script for multiple variations of the language, there might actually be differences in the way the language is written in different regions or countries. So when we decide to develop a keyboard, we have to understand who we are developing for, what particular variation that we need to consider here, ask the question whether we can actually develop something that's inclusive of all the variations, or whether we are developing for a particular variation, but we are making it very specific that it is that particular variation and not including all the others, so that in the future others would have the opportunity to develop a specific version for a different variation of the same language. Languages have a history, and that is especially the case for languages that are in areas that would have been historically colonized. So that means that at some point in that region, someone decided to write down the language, and often this was done by people who had their own perspective on the language. So this might have been a French speaker or an English speaker or German speaker, or somebody who came at the language with their own language background. And that means that the way the language was written down initially might not actually be the best way for the language to be written, and that some communities are now starting to change these writing systems. So the question is always, how do we deal with a change in the language and the way it is written? And how can we actually react to that, but also which of the writing variations are we actually developing for? At the same time, when we are developing, we need to see what are the dominant languages in the region, and to what extent do we actually need to consider that. So are we developing a keyboard based on the layout that people might already know? So let's say they live in a country that has French as a colonial language, and we are developing for their own language, non-French. Then do we still use the French keyboard as the base layout, or would it actually be more appropriate to start with a completely new layout? And that really depends on what our assumptions are and what we know about the people using the keyboard. We also need to think of previous standardization and digitization efforts. So this can, for example, be how was the language actually encoded in Unicode, and to what extent does it actually work for what we're doing? But also, you know, who has developed keyboards before, and if we are creating a new keyboard, what are we trying to achieve with that? So we need to understand the potential conflicting interests there. And when it comes to conflicting interests, it is always important to realize that when we have somebody contacting us and asking us to develop a keyboard, they are representing maybe their own opinion, or maybe they are representing a small group of speakers of the language, but they might not actually represent the community as a whole, which is possibly quite difficult to do, actually, to be able to reconcile all the different potential opinions that people might have on how a keyboard should be created. So from these considerations, our strategies are also derived. So when we get a keyboard request, one of the first things we do is to see whether there are previous keyboards for the language. Sometimes the requester doesn't know that these keyboards exist, but sometimes there's also a reason for requesting a different one. So we need to understand what the request is. Is it a different language variation? Has the orthography changed, or was the previous attempt not very suitable for what they're trying to do? Different reasons. We need to understand where the language is used, what the different writing systems and variations are, so that we actually develop for the right variation and actually take into consideration all the characters that need to be included. We try to learn about the requester, who they are, who they represent, and we also work quite closely, or as closely as we can, with the communities, and we're trying to get their feedback throughout the process and always make the offer to implement changes throughout. On this slide, you see a list of languages for which members of our group have already developed a keyboard or are currently doing so. I also included the approximate number of speakers for those languages. And yes, of course, there are some very small languages such as Sunawar and Elfdalian, but also take note of the fact that there are quite a few languages that have, you know, more than 500,000 speakers, close to 1 million, or even more than 2.5 million speakers, actually. If this presentation has piqued your interest, we would love for you to get involved. Maybe you want a keyboard developed yourself, or you know of a language community who would like a keyboard developed, and maybe you also want to start developing keyboards yourself. In this case, you would be very welcome to join our group of volunteers. Maybe you would like to be a trainer that teaches others how to make keyboards. Whatever it is that you're interested in, we would be really delighted to hear from you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tabea.
Hello.
Our next speaker is Mr. Daniel Prado, consultant, former director at Union Latin, and former executive secretary at Mayaya in Argentina. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Buenos días desde Buenos Aires. Bonsoir Paris. Good evening for you all. Let me begin by remembering the memory of Adama Samaseku, who was one of the great advocates of multilingualism and linguistic diversity, and who has recently left us. I will always remember him as a great inspiration and a friend. Today I will present the completion of the first inventory ever made of digital linguistic resources for indigenous languages of Latin America. I have carried out this work for the Organization of Ibero-American States, OEI, an international organization that brings together countries whose official languages are Spanish and Portuguese, involving 20 countries in Latin America plus Spain, Portugal, and Equatorial Guinea. As we already know, indigenous languages, including those of Latin America, have been invisible for centuries. This is how numerous languages in the region have disappeared, with estimates indicating twice as many as those existing today. In a continent of 1 billion inhabitants, less than 50 million speak an indigenous language, with Guatemala, Bolivia, Mexico, Paraguay, and Peru having the highest density of indigenous population. We are also witnessing the extinction of many languages and probably most of those remaining. Only a few decades ago, there has been a gradual integration of speakers and indigenous languages into public and educational life, although this has been timidly for a minority and scarcely or not at all for the majority of languages in the continent. The advent of the internet could have been a great opportunity for languages to achieve this visibility, but due to the lack of adaptation of protocols, sources, keyboards, etc., the vast majority of languages in the world, especially indigenous languages, could only integrate recently. This was compounded by the lack of internet access and digital literacy, factors that still prevail today. This late integration of indigenous or minoritized languages into the internet has been felt even more violently or visibly in Latin America. Added to this is the scant coordination among entities promoting indigenous languages, particularly in digitization. Until now, we even lack statistical data on existing digital resources in indigenous languages, let alone data on the lags. With this work carried out within the framework of the OEI, we have attempted to address this lack of information. Conducted between July 2022 and April 2023, it consisted of collecting linguistic resources of indigenous languages that have been digitized. We also collected relevant institutional resources related to any policy for promoting and digitizing indigenous languages to anticipate joint actions. This collection of resources resulted in first an analysis of the digital lacks for indigenous languages. We are talking about shortcomings, all those linguistic resources that are not non-existent or not integrated into the digital universe. Finally, the study allowed for public recommendation on the initiatives or policies necessary for the integration of indigenous languages into the digital world. The material obtained has been the main databases as well as synthesis reports with multiple detailed tables and graphs. We have been able to detect more than 5,000 resources from 1,000 different sites or applications, which translates the about 25,000 items or sub-resources. We worked with 400 languages and their variants, totaling just over 700 tongues. In this graph, we have the breakdown of resources. Out of the 25,000 mentioned elements, we mainly detected all those language descriptions, references, socio-linguistic data, language location and maps, texts, language structure, videos, audios, linguistic tools, lexicons, and teaching resources. Here indicates the quantity of resources or elements referring to each of these divisions from highest to lowest. We aimed to gather different information about each resource based on about 10 records for each, considering relevance, amount of information each resource, quality of that information, uniqueness, interface language of each resource, producers or disseminators, etc. We know that the majority of these resources come from the academic world, followed by the associative world, the indigenous communities themselves, personal and informal resources, ending with public and corporate resources. The interface language for accessing resources is mainly English, followed by site or application with multilingual interfaces, and then Spanish, Portuguese, and almost lastly, the indigenous language itself. As we can see, resources are more collected and disseminated by entities or individuals who do not necessarily have the indigenous language as their mother tongue. An interesting fact is that more elements have been found for the languages of Mexico than for Quechua or Guarani, which are much more widely spoken, for a series of reasons discussed in the final report of the study. Along notable points, we can mention that Quechua, Guarani, Aymara, Maya, and Nahuatl are visible in what we call major applications or sites: social networks, operating systems, educational systems, or mobile applications of global use, such as Facebook, Bing, Chrome, Microsoft Office, Duolingo, Google Search, Google Translation, etc. As mentioned, an inventory of entities was also conducted, which, although I will not go into details, we can indicate that more than 2,000 entities dedicated to indigenous populations were detected, although only 350 are relevant for promotion and digitization of languages, and among them, about 70 could have high relevance for developing the digitization of numerous indigenous languages. These entities are most cooperation agencies, coalitions, or confederations, laboratories, public institutions, etc. As I say, this study also allowed for an analysis of LACs, language by language, which I will not present due to the lack of time, but we generated, among others, the proposal of public recommendations for the digital integration of indigenous languages in Latin America. In order to address all gaps and lacks in particular, these were some of the recommendations. Greater access to the internet and mobile telephony, digital literacy for populations, training and education for populations, training and support for digital activists, greater incentives for active participation of communities, provision of material for resource digitization for those communities, organization of priority sectors for digitization, and of course for language with which less diffusion, the majority carry out actions prior to those mentioned, since they often lack alphabet, spelling rules, grammar analysis, and phonological transcription tools, lexicon, etc. My conclusion is that it could be expected that this study and the data it generated be updated periodically and integrated into a website, as this is nothing more than a snapshot of a specific moment and needs to be systematically updated. This could allow for greater visibility of the region's languages, as well as the design of specific actions in favor of the digitization of indigenous languages. acknowledgements in 4 of the main languages of the region, Guarani, Quechua, Aymara, and Nahuatl. Muchas gracias, merci beaucoup, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Daniel. This was a great presentation. Our last presentation for this session is by Mr. Hiro Patrianto, Dr. Gatut Susanto, and Mr. Awaludin Rusiandi from Indonesia. Mr. Awaludin Rusiandi will introduce all the speakers.
Thank you, Jeanette. Hello, everyone, and good evening from Indonesia to you all. My name is Awaludin Rusiandi, and I'm from Indonesia. I'm from the Language Office of East Java, and I'm speaking on behalf of my other colleagues, Dr. Gatut Susanto and Mr. Hero Patrianto. Both of them are from Indonesia. And thank you for both of my colleagues for allowing me to delivering our presentation. And before delivering the presentation, I would like to thank to the chairpersons, members organizing this event, and other participants in this event. It is definitely an honor for us in Indonesia that we can participate here right now. And to begin our presentation, I would like to give you an overview about East Java province in Indonesia. So there are 38 administrative areas in East Java, Indonesia, and there are 2 major local languages spoken there, and each local language has its own variation. So the variation is quite different with the standard version. I mean, the Javanese version of East Java, spoken in East Java, is quite different with the one spoken in the Middle Java, so the standard Javanese. So this is our presentation is going to look like. So I will explain the background of the project and then the result and process of the project and some recommendations. So this presentation is basically based on our project here in East Java. So this is the reason why we initiated this project is because that Indonesia needs children's stories to improve children's literacy, especially from pre-reading to early readers. So the Language Development and Fostering Agency, or Badan Bahasa, is one of the national institution under the Ministry of Education in Indonesia, had tried to support the national literacy movement in Indonesia by providing high quality reading materials. And this is done because as a mandate of the UNESCO standards that each child in Indonesia can read 3 new books per year at least. And then therefore, an attempt to provide reading materials for children in Indonesia needs to be done to improve their literacy index in Indonesia. And the theme of these books were family and friends, animals, and hobbies, health, as well as local wisdom. However, all of those books were written in Bahasa Indonesia. And I think that is one main problem here. And that is also the reason why we do our project. So this is the efforts made by Badan Bahasa related to GLN, or the only focusing on providing reading materials in Bahasa Indonesia. And then how about reading materials in local languages? And don't the 718 indigenous languages in Indonesia also have the right to be inherited and preserved? So to start the discussion, this is the data from the Indonesian National Library. You can see that the level of reading in Indonesia is only 61.48%, and it is in the medium category. So here is what actually our project looks like. So these are some of examples of our project. So we have provided 110 illustrated bilingual children's storybook in 3 local languages in East Java, namely Javanese, and then using Javanese and Madurese. So this is what we call, we have a STEM theme in our illustrated children's storybooks. So it's basically talking about science, engineering, technology, arts, or mathematics in East Java local wisdom. So we are trying to teach the children in East Java to learn that their local language and culture also have elements of STEAM, just like other languages in the world. In this example, children will learn that aside from cooking, shallot is also useful to relieve itching caused by caterpillars. So the title on top is in the local language, and the title below is in Bahasa Indonesia. So children will learn how to master Bahasa Indonesia and also the local language. This one is the content of the story. So as you can see, text on top is in Javanese and the text below is in Bahasa Indonesia. So we are now talking about how we do the project. So when we organize this project, we made sure that all processes go well to produce the best children's stories in East Java. So the substance of children's stories is edited by expert writers in children's story in Indonesia. And then we ensure that all our children's stories have STEAM elements with its Javanese local wisdom. And then the local languages are edited by experts from each of the 3 languages, namely Javanese, Using Javanese, and Madurese. We also ensure that the language in the story is using the local languages used to communicate in East Java. It is very important that children in East Java get reading materials in their local language, because standard language is not always spoken there. And then most children's reading materials available in indigenous languages in East Java use standard regional languages, and it makes them difficult to learn the language because they do not communicate using it. And as a recommendation, we propose that although we have succeeded in providing 110 illustrated children's stories, all of them must be disseminated throughout East Java so that the inheritance and preservation of the local languages in East Java can be achieved. We must also coordinate with all stakeholders in East Java to create a local language learning module in East Java using those 110 illustrated children's stories. Model of inheritance and preservation of local languages in East Java must be engaged so that local languages in East Java and all indigenous languages in Indonesia are not extinct. Indonesia has 718 indigenous languages, and without proper attempts to revitalize those languages, they will surely become extinct someday. That's all our presentation in this event. Terima kasih. Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you very much to all three people involved in the project. Thank you, Awaladdin, for presenting. We are now going to have a very short Q&A. We have one question from Michael Wynn for Mr. Prado. Seeing that there is so much written about these indigenous languages by non-native speakers and for an English academic audience, is there any indication whether or not this has helped with language learning and revitalization? Daniel?
Yes, you listen me? Yes. Yes, that certainly helped. A lot of material from different countries comes from academia, public institutions, NGOs, etc., where there were not necessarily a few indigenous people and where bilingual education policies have been carried out. Of course, that depends on the country we are talking about. No? In Paraguay or Mexico, for example, the presence of native speakers is greater than in the others, of course. But what is taken is the production of content, including education systems, by the speakers themselves. In this sense, the initiatives are rested on, for a minority of the continent's languages, as the report indicates.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you coming from Michael. This concludes the second session. We would like to go now to our third session. And the next session is on AI and cultural diversity for Indigenous communities. And it is moderated by Mr. Michael Wynn, Digital Applications Librarian, Mukurtu CMS, at Washington State University in the US. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeanette. So machine learning, large language models, artificial intelligence as a whole seems to be the topic of constant discussion in the news, in industry, and in our communities. Many people are champions of the technologies and their potentials, while others are much more reserved. However, Indigenous languages certainly seem to have the potential to benefit greatly from the use of artificial intelligence in translation, revitalization, and other intersections with cultural diversity. So today I'm excited to introduce Michael Runningwolf. Michael Runningwolf, who is Lakota and Cheyenne, was raised in rural Montana with intermittent water and electricity. Naturally, he is now a computer scientist. Michael's a former engineer for Amazon's Alexa. He's taught at Northeastern University and is the co-founder and lead architect for First Language's AI Reality. Michael uses AI to reclaim Indigenous languages and has been awarded an MIT Solve Fellowship, the Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship, and the Patrick J. McGovern AI for Humanity Prize. So please join me in welcoming Michael Runningwolf as he speaks to us today about regenerative Indigenous AI. And over to you, Michael.
Thank you for that introduction. Give me a second here. Okay, so let's see. I think it's going to the wrong page. Give me a second. Sorry. Technical difficulty. It's sharing the wrong thing.
It's different every time. Absolutely.
Yes. You never with a let's see here. Well, what I'm talking about, thank you for the introduction. And what I'm going to talk about today, while I'm figuring out my logistics here, is going to be how to use artificial intelligence for language reclamation and in a holistic way. And I see what happened. Sorry, my PowerPoint just crashed, hard crashed. So, okay, let's see if this works here. And my apologies. And how we could use this technology for a holistic language reclamation that addresses community needs on a level that is beneficial to the community and create speakers and is listened to agency over this technology AI. And so quick intro, like I said, like I was introduced by Michael. Thank you very much for that. I am Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet. I was raised in rural Montana, and this is what you're looking at here is my wife's encampment in southeastern Montana. Is there's the Northern Cheyenne, and then there's also our neighbors, the Abzalaka and Crow, and it's the largest teepee encampment in the world. Happens every August, and it's part of my wife's tribal celebrations of their culture, and so what I'm going to talk like here's in North America, you have a wide diversity of languages, and what you're seeing here are languages that are language families themselves. And so the big, large, gold color, the Algonquin language family that spans from the Colorado Rockies all the way over to the East Coast. That on the East Coast, there's Mohawk, and Seneca languages, and then on the west side of up against the Rockies, you have the Blackfeet, and then my mother's tribe is part of this a large Algonquin language family. The blue is the Siouan languages, and the red is Athabascan languages. And if you notice, take your gaze to the west coast and the northwest, you see a large amount of language diversity. And what this map actually is essentially a map of manifest destiny. As you proceed further and further west or further east, language diversity declines, but as you go further west, you start to see language families. And these language families contain languages, a handful of languages up to hundreds of languages, like the Algonquin languages, like I was talking about before. And my research is focusing upon languages that are found in British Columbia and Canada, and the far northwest of the United States and Washington State. And there's some particular language family groups in there that have because of the language diversity, they also exhibit linguistic features that are not found by other languages, and there's high diversity. And we're approaching these development technologies that if we can work on these languages that work in the Northwest, we can then begin scaling the technology to other languages in the United States and in Canada and Mexico. And what I want to talk, why do we care about this? I think we have had speaker after speaker, and the fundamental reason is that like every other place on Earth, in North America, nearly 70% of our languages are endangered. In the United States alone, 90% of our languages are endangered, and furthermore, 70% of all our languages are critically endangered, and we're actually at the possibility of losing many of our languages within the next 10 years because the average age of speakers is they're elders and over 60 years old. But also, so what can we do? As we're talking about artificial intelligence, using AI, there are certain barriers to using this technology for Indigenous communities. For number one, Indigenous languages in North America are not English. A lot of the technology being developed for artificial intelligence assumes that the underlying language is fundamentally a type of English. And there's some historical reasons behind this, but basically Western technology is oriented toward Western languages, obviously, like Alexa and Siri and Google Assistant, and even large language models. They all make the fundamental assumption that your language is structured like a Western language, but Western languages are kind of weird. If you look at all 7,000 languages, approximately 7,000 languages, majority of those 7,000 languages are polysynthetic. Not only polysynthetic, highly polysynthetic. And what does that mean? It means that the words are constructed dynamically on the fly, given the particular context and the speaker. And they also give but they have infinite dictionaries, and it's a gradient. It's not on one end you have languages in the Northwest, and at one end you have English. And so what does that mean exactly? In linguistics, you have this concept of a morpheme, and the morpheme is the smallest amount of sound that conveys meaning. And so if you think of the simple phrase, the red car, that's 3 morphemes, conjugation of to be, a color, and the automobile. And when you say cars, the red cars, the S that attaches to the car is polysynthesis. And that's basically how polysynthetic English gets. But imagine if your entire language, top to bottom, every word has dynamicism. What this means from a practical standpoint is that every word in a polysynthetic language contains as much information as an English sentence. And so in a way, English is actually kind of inefficient in information conveyance. And there's also some other behaviors, particularly in Northwestern languages. There's error correcting codes for you computer nerds out there in the audience. If you get a partial construction of the sentence, like you mishear something, it's a loud, noisy environment, you're able to reconstruct the rest of the word. And so because of the rules of the language. And this isn't represented in modern machine learning science. This is not possible. Current AI fundamentally assumes that your dictionary is finite. Like, for instance, English models typically assume that the entire English language is represented by 60,000 words, which doesn't seem like a lot, 60,000 words, but the average American speaks only about 4,000 words in their vocabulary on it. And if you have college, maybe you speak 8,000 words or something like that. And it's sufficient. It's a small data set that you don't need a large dictionary, but for indigenous languages, there are as many words as there are stars in the sky. Another barrier to using technology is, as was alluded to in other and by other language activists, is that our data is sacred, and we have a history of colonization. For centuries now, we have been dealing with circumstances where our material culture, never mind our land, and their intellectual property is very valuable commercially. And like, for instance, this is Sitting Bull's winter count, and it's sitting in the Smithsonian. It's very unlikely that Lakota, my family, will ever have any relationship with it other than peering at it through a glass window. And if you look carefully, there's like a nose smudge, because I was trying to get in there, kind of looking at some of the details, and that's at risk of happening to our indigenous languages because of the value. Artificial intelligence requires a lot of data, huge amounts of data. And so there's this effect of commoditization of our identities. And in the financial world, data is considered the new oil. And so as the value of our data, it's novel data that's not represented in the public data sets. You're seeing behaviors where academians, corporations, governments, and large institutions, public and private, wanted to have our data and making it proprietary. For example, the typical violation of our indigenous data sovereignty is mundane. It's academians wanting someone trying to do their master's degree or someone trying to do their PhD and wanting to have access to our data. And because you're doing your PhD, your graduate school at a university, all your data becomes owned by the university, by the way, which means that when you go to a community and pay your informant, as it's called, $50 or so, or $100 maybe, to collect data, you've now created this unbalanced circumstances where the community's data has now become owned by the institution, and the institution is turning it around and then reselling this data. So recently there was an incident where a university in the United States was selling data of community members for thousands of dollars per hour. Meanwhile, the community members are the research subjects were being paid a small fee. And so this dynamic, we need to change that dynamic. Another one is that how best do we protect our data? How best do we use our data for the protection of the common good for our communities? We do it ourselves. We have direct agency. We need to have agency over this technology. We need to understand the fundamentals and participate in the construction of these technologies that affect us. Unfortunately, there's very few computer scientists. There's probably only 12 of us in all of North America. kind of another component of that. This is a map of Canada. Our communities are small. In Canada, communities, it could be less than a couple thousand people. They're rural, isolated from each other, and not allowed to coordinate with each other due to a variety of logistical reasons. And this all causes a situation where the community is being hemmed in by lack of the technology, not being fundamentally incompatible with their communities and languages and ethics. The data is being stolen, and so the communities are aware of this and concerned and unwilling to participate in this research, which is honestly quite good. And we don't have the talent. How do we conduct this research when we don't have the capacity to do so? And so we're stuck. What do? We just do it ourselves. These are my friends. Tahiku Media in 2018, which is a long time ago, I'm getting old, began the creation of the very first indigenous automatic speech recognition system. And so this is the Tahiku Media, they're a Maori group, and they're certainly the front runners in how to build indigenous technology with it's a grassroots operation, it's a nonprofit, and their objective is to protect their iwi's language. Modeled after that, I am the co-founder of the First Languages AI Reality Initiative, which is hosted by Mila. And our objectives are simple. How do we give agency to the communities? We integrate with our community research partners. We don't have research subjects. We have partners who help us develop this technology. As we're going into the community, we're addressing basic needs and addressing our technologies for what the community wants and desires out of how do we use artificial intelligence for indigenous communities. For instance, here, a part of this is a nonprofit partner called Indigenous, and one of the programs is to take high schoolers and teach them computer science and artificial intelligence via teaching them how to build their own AI recognition system for indigenous plants. And these are Lakota kids. And we plan to scale when the research component is done, that as soon as we get results, we're going to be applying the technology through education and taking the technology, teaching the youth and the community members on how to use the technology so that they themselves can be artificial intelligence practitioners, machine learning engineers, machine learning researchers, and apply it every day. And it's totally possible. None of the kids you've seen in the picture, all of them range from 14 years old until 18, high school age. None of them had prior computer science. And within a week, as you can see here, they were doing the very first AI model. They went from zero, taught them very basic Python, typical tool for artificial intelligence research, and they were building the first AI models within 5 business days. And so what we really need to do is go to this model where the AI works for the community, where the technology is integrated within their practice and works holistically for how their community works, that the data retains sovereignty. Part of the research, which I failed to mention, is that we're drawing up contracts that basically say your data is your data. We're only interested in the methodology and the research to apply this technology to as many communities as possible. And as part of this, to round it all up, our goal is to also make sure that the communities have true agency over the research. We need to get this out of the ivory tower. It's not as if automatic speech recognition for indigenous languages has never been done. A lot of these research, though, is esoteric, using technologies that are not reproducible outside of a big lab or without millions of dollars of resources at the corporation. And our eventual goal is to create community-oriented, cheap devices that allow the communities to revitalize their languages as like simple little cedar boxes with a little Raspberry Pi in them that has basic indigenous linguistic pedagogy built into them. And the objective, of course, is to give us true agency, to allow indigenous languages to see and be part of the future on their own terms, on their speakers' own desires, and build technology that works on the community level where 2 little girls can be united to create an experience and sharing each other's cultures in a respectful way. And for more information, here's a quick QR code. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was fantastic. It looks like we have one or two questions coming in. So we have one question for you from Somya. How does the community navigate challenges related to linguistic nuances and contextual accuracy?
That's a
That
big
might
question.
That also might be addressed through the lens of just corpus sizes. You were saying earlier that we need large models, and I think that could tie in as well.
So we're not building large language models. We're not interested in that. And I'm actually a big AI skeptic. Actually, if you can avoid it, step one, don't build AI. Step one, you don't need AI. Do you really need AI? You probably don't. Communities don't. For me, the artificial intelligence is to holistically address a problem with language communities that don't have enough speakers to teach their curriculum. And so we're not building large language models. That's a waste of time for anyone. It's a waste of time for Google to build it. It's a waste of time for Meta to build it. It's a waste of time for OpenAI to build it because they're toys, very expensive toys. But going back to this component, what we're doing is we're trying to address a community need where communities don't have a lot of formal pedagogy. Like communities have practice of teaching the language, but that's been interrupted. What's the typical workflow? Your grandmother and your grandparents and your parents teach you in the home when you were a little baby and you grow up speaking your language. For Indigenous peoples in North America, original peoples in Mexico, Native Americans, United States, and First Nations in Canada, we've had our languages scrubbed away, literally. As recently as in the 2010s, the Canadian government was doing acts of genocide against their communities to eliminate our culture and our languages, including sterilizing women so that they don't have future babies, to eliminate our cultures. And this is going on now within the last 20 years. And what we're focusing on now is that you have a lot of language communities where this intergenerational trauma has caused a generational gap of speakers. And so how do you get to Ayena's community group? So you have to plug a hole of pedagogy and linguistics and being able to bridge these generations through curricula. And the AI is simply a mechanism to help practice the curricula. So we're building small pragmatic AI that supports curricula development and applications on the ground in coordination with the community. So we're not doing this in a vacuum. Yes, we are academians. I'm an AI researcher working with linguists, but the community sets the tone and says, this is what we want to teach our youth. This is what we want to teach the next generation of speakers. And we're creating technology to support that because there simply isn't enough speakers to do so.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think we have time for probably one more quick question, if you don't mind. So we have a question from Tubea. To what extent do non-written forms of communication come into play as far as the hopes for AI are concerned?
Yeah, so there's different types of automatic speech recognition. So one of them is the big models like Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, and they require strict a strict orthography and then mapping. It's usually IPA, honestly. Most people use IPA across the world. What we're approaching is to try to avoid that. Currently, we do require that the audio be written out, but actually at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Like we could support even the language, the Cree system. I would say I'm blanking, my mind's blanking right now, but it just basically needs to be a type of Unicode. And so what we're doing is that we're not trying to mine archival audio. We're generating new content that would normally be part of the conversational speech. And so kind of like this question and the last question kind of go to the point where like, what is it that you want to teach new learners? We're not trying to teach them poetry and art history necessarily, or We're just trying to get them to be able to say hello to their grandmother and say, do you want some tea? So it's pretty simple. And what we're doing basically is that we identify 20 template phrases that are representative of the morphology of the language, and then we create variations using vocabulary. And so it works out to about 500 phrases. And these are all generated with the community directly.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. So I think with that, we are going to be moving on to our closing address. So I'm pleased to introduce the closing address for today's event, given by Altasia Correa Rubin, the co-chair of UNESCO's Global Task Force for Making a Decade of Action for Indigenous Languages. Altasia is a member of the Kokama Nation, a Tupian people currently living in Brazil and Peru. She is a professor of linguistics at Brasilia University and coordinator of Indigenous Peoples Ministry of Brazilian Governments. And the translation for Ms. Rubin's address has been provided by Mr. Evandro de Souza Bonfim, professor of ethnology and anthropological linguistics at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I think we can go ahead and play that. Thank you.
Em nome da Força Tarefa Global, da Década Internacional das Línguas Indígenas, em nome dos organizadores do evento, Translation Commons e UNESCO, eu quero agradecer a presença de todos neste Dia Mundial pela Diversidade Cultural, pelo diálogo e o desenvolvimento, bem como pelas inestimáveis contribuições de todos os presentes. As ideias e as experiências são muito importantes para nós, à medida que procedemos à integração e à incorporação de novas tecnologias, com o objetivo de garantir a preservação, a revitalização e a promoção das línguas indígenas. Esperamos que a sessão tenha enfatizado as estreitas relações entre línguas indígenas e diversidade cultural e demonstrado como línguas indígenas têm se adaptado, se difundido e se revitalizado através dos diversos recursos tecnológicos, como a inteligência artificial. De fato, língua e diversidade estão tão interligadas que a perda da diversidade linguística implica na perda da diversidade cultural. Esta é uma das nossas principais expectativas dentro da Força da Tarefa Global da Década Internacional das Línguas Indígenas. Fomentar meios para que as línguas indígenas sejam representadas e utilizadas nos espaços públicos. Assim, um dos 10 temas do Plano de Ação Global da década diz respeito às línguas indígenas como veículo da biodiversidade e da herança cultural viva, ao passo que a participação e o acesso a todas as formas de cultura se fortalecem pela atuação dos povos indígenas. Em suma, a preservação das línguas indígenas vai além da salvaguarda da diversidade linguística, pois significa garantir a riqueza da herança cultural humana para gerações vindouras. No Brasil, artistas indígenas e não indígenas têm usado os cantos em língua indígena e a música eletrônica para dizer que o futuro é ancestral. É preciso reflorestar mentes para que o chamado ancestral possa ser ouvido pelas gerações contemporâneas, para demonstrar que a língua não se resume à gramática. É uma forma de pensar, de conhecer, única de cada povo e fundamental para a compreensão da experiência humana no mundo, nos biomas do planeta. Nós incentivamos vocês a compartilhar toda forma de promoção e reconhecimento das línguas indígenas conosco da UNESCO e da Força de Tarefa Global. Na medida em que entramos no 3º ano da década internacional, vamos prosseguir na defesa do reconhecimento das línguas indígenas como elemento essencial para o desenvolvimento, em continuidade ao nosso compromisso de honrar, celebrar e salvaguardar as línguas indígenas em todo o globo. Nós comemoramos o Dia Mundial da Diversidade Cultural.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. And hello, everyone. My name is Tex Texan. I'm a globalization architect, and I am one of the technical advisors to Translation Commons and a contributor to the Language Digitalization Initiative. I promise not to speak for very long. I do want to remark what an amazing event for the occasion of the World Day for Cultural Diversity, for dialogue and development. It was just amazing. Speaking for myself, I enjoyed the panels and the case studies and learned quite a bit. I also have several significant takeaways from the many speakers. There are so many that I can't mention them all. However, if our audience would like to add their takeaways that were significant to them, you can add them in the chat or as comments on the YouTube stream. We will collect them all and share them with the speakers and on our website. A few points that resonated to me were, first of all, there's tremendous number of indigenous languages still existing today, and the catastrophic decline and loss of those languages that is ongoing. Dr. Cousins said by 2050, all the Australian indigenous languages will be gone. And several others referred to the same thing for their indigenous communities. The scope of the work that is needed is colossal. And today we heard about the attempts to preserve and understand all different forms, whether it was oral, handwritten, keyboards, and the use of AI to work with these languages. And we also heard that it's not just the archiving and cataloging and analysis of these languages, but for example, Dr. Cousins' approach to having practice with the languages and immersion. We heard Ms. Twig talking about the use in social media, and these things is just a tremendous amount of activity that is ongoing, but needs to be continued. And we also heard about the challenges involved in all of this, whether it was for keyboards or in the collection of handwriting and tools and the issues around data privacy. But I'm given hope by the various speakers as well. For example, Dr. Prado, he outlined plans and policies, and I was especially thankful for his discussion of collecting resources and identifying resources and providing reports. But most especially, since I also work in the field for keyboards, an identification that we need coordination among all of the groups that are working in these spaces. We're all working individually, and being able to touch base with the other teams that are doing similar work or have information that is relevant, rather than our each going off and trying to collect them one by one. I think those are tremendous ideas. And I was also inspired by Mr. Running Wolf and his discussion of agency, giving agency to each of the communities. Teaching and learning is a common theme that Ms. Twig also identified, and I especially thought significant her point about the youth need to know how to learn their language, not there's the interest and so forth, but nobody says, here's how you learn these languages. So it was a tremendous amount of information today. I want to thank all of the speakers and a lot of useful information and a lot of inspiration for how we go forward. So I want to thank everyone for that. We at Translation Commons have intentions to create additional events recognizing other cultures and other regions as well. If you're interested in helping us with this, let us know. You can see some of the different ways you can contact us. It could be as simple as sending us an email, krista@translationcommons.org. You also see our YouTube channel and Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, LinkedIn, and Instagram. All of these are different ways you can reach out to us. We welcome having people volunteer. We're entirely volunteer-based and nonprofit organization. And our volunteers are each very influential in driving the activities we create. And you can help create events around topics or communities where your interest lies. So please make note of the different ways you can contact us. So I'd also like to announce that in celebration of the upcoming International Translation Day, we have another online event coming on September 30th. The details will be announced shortly. This event is sponsored jointly by UNESCO and the International Decade of Indigenous Languages and by Translation Commons. As you know, we've hosted terrific ITD events in the past 2 years that were well attended and received many accolades. This year, we intend to exceed that success. If you follow our social media, you will receive announcements with the details. You can also view videos from the past events on our YouTube channel, and you can look up for the different playlists there. So on behalf of Translation Commons, I would like to thank all of our speakers and the many volunteers that worked so hard behind the scenes today and for several months to bring this event together, and who will be continuing to make the videos and slides of this event so they're available to everyone. So thank you to the coordinators, thank you to the presenters. You can see them all listed here. And we're especially grateful to our contributors who generously gave their time and condensed many years worth of experience and insights into their presentations. With that, this event has come to a close. However, our work in the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is ongoing. With your help, we look forward to continuing this effort and marking our progress next year and every year on this date, on the September 30th date, until we can host this event with simultaneous interpretation and transcription in many Indigenous languages. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for your support.